As Jenny mentioned, my name is Kate Gigax. I've been supporting leadership development with game developers across various studios, many PlayStation studios, and the newly created Bad Robot Games. I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm an organizational psychologist and a leadership coach. So that means that I take the science of psychology and apply it to the workplace settings. And that boils down to 3 beliefs that I hold very strongly. One is that work shouldn't be painful. Work should be something we enjoy, and it allows us to bring our unique strengths to bear. Work should be a place where we do our best work. Number 2, the second belief, which is the tagline of my company, which is better leaders, better lives. When we have better leaders, when we are better leaders, and that doesn't just mean managing people, it means managing ourselves, then everyone benefits. We are happier, the people around us are happier, and we can all have better lives. And the third is that leadership isn't just about leading other people. It's fundamentally about leading yourself, and asserting your voice is a very important part of leading yourself effectively. My partner here with me today, who's the head of programs at Development Corps, is Jamie Frankel. She's producing the session, and she'll be operating behind the scenes to make sure everything is working smoothly. So if you're having any issues in the chat, or if you have any issues with the breakout room, you can send her a message. This session is intended to be a micro dose of development on a topic that can be tricky for a lot of us for a lot of reasons. And we call it asserting your voice. So my hope is that the next 90 minutes can leave you with a plan for speaking up when you want to, and tools so you can do that effectively. And Limit Break is also about community. So you'll be able to connect with other people here today, maybe someone who you don't know very well, to build that community. So we're going to drop a handout in the chat. It's a link to a handout. Please download this now if you can. If you have any issues, you can send a message to Jamie. And this is a fillable form. That's why it's important for you to download. So you can go ahead and be typing some of your notes in the chat. So go ahead and take a second, download that now, check out, make sure it's fillable. This is so you can capture your insights, because we find that insights are kind of like helium balloons. You can sit here and think, oh, that's interesting, but then it can just kind of float away. So we want you to be able to capture what you're taking in here today. So those are kind of our logistics. We want to start with just increasing the energy in the room. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions. In the Zoom function, can you raise your hand if you find the term networking a little bit painful? So let's just see a raise of hands. If you when you hear that there's networking happening, you think, ugh, yuck. Yes, me too. I tend to think of it as kind of inauthentic, very surfacey. We call this activity pain-free networking. So this is hopefully the version of networking that does not make you cringe, that does not make you think, yuck, I hate this, I don't want to do this. But one thing we know is true is that we tend to be better at networking when there is got some noise in the background. Jamie, can you mute some people? Thank you. That we tend to be better at networking when there is some structure and when it is short. So that is what we're going to give you today, some structure and some short. So here's what we're going to do. You will have 2 minutes. So you actually have just 1 minute to yourself to answer the question, what is something that you are proud of? And this can be something at work, it can be something at home, it can just be something in life that you are proud of. So we're going to send you into a breakout room with one other person, and you introduce yourself, just be normal, right? Introduce yourself, what you do, where you work, and then just here's one thing you're proud of, and you have 1 minute. And that's kind of what should make it pain-free. We're giving you exactly the prescription for what to do, and then you get to meet someone else. So we're going to Zoom you into a room to introduce yourself, where you are. If you know somebody that you're in the room with, just say hey, and then one thing you're proud of, and you'll be interested about how much you can learn in just 1 minute about someone. Okay, Looks like we're having some questions about the handout. So we're going to make sure to get that out to you. Luckily, you don't need it just yet, but we do encourage you to make note of the person you meet, because hopefully this will be just one conversation that you would not have had today. Okay, Jamie, are we ready for the breakouts? Okay, so we're going to send you in 1 minute for yourself, 1 minute for the other person, and then we're going to bring you back. So what is a thing you're most proud of, either at work or at home? Have fun meeting each other.
Sorry, at the last second, someone popped out and I had to make a group of 3 or they would have been by themselves.
Maybe we should pause the recording until this group is.
Like resume on the recording. Oh, you've already done it. Awesome.
Didn't you get a chance to say bye?
Yeah. We promised you it would be short. Okay, so would love to just see in the chat. By the way, we want to keep a very active chat in this session. Would love for it to be just on fire. So would love to just hear, if we forgot there was only a minute. Yeah. Would love to just hear how that was for you. Just I heard someone didn't have a chance to say goodbye. We were mid-speech. Goodbye to my new friend. Great. Okay, so a quick, everything that we're doing today is micro. So that was a micro dose of networking, and we're going to do it again. We're going to give you a chance to meet someone else. So here's a new question. Think of a time when you were proud of how you asserted your voice or spoke up. So we'll give you just a second. Some of us require a little bit more time. When was a time that you were proud? And again, this can be at work or at home where you were proud of, yeah, I was able to either stand strong or state an opinion or speak up about something that was important to me. So we'll do the same thing. You'll land in a room. You'll have 1 minute. You realize how quickly a minute goes now to introduce yourself and share a source of pride. And for many of us, sharing something that we're proud of in and of itself is a little bit hard. So this is your invitation and permission to do a little bragging. Share something that you are proud of. Okay, so here we go. We're going to zoom you off again. And remember that 1 minute goes by pretty quick. We'll see you in 2 minutes.
I'm going.
Bye.
Bye.
Very disconcerting. Goodbye.
See you later, alligator.
Okay, well, welcome back. So again, would love to hear in the chat how was that you were able to do. We call that power shot networking, where it's short and sweet, and you might miss the opportunity to say goodbye, but hopefully you are able to make a connection. So we did leave space on the handout if you met somebody new or somebody that you might want to reach out to again, or that you wouldn't have otherwise had a conversation with. You can jot down who that was. Great. We're saying our goodbyes here, which is why this is nice compared to being in person, where it takes us so long to get back together, because goodbyes take a while. Okay, so hopefully that was a little bit of pain-free networking, a little bit of connection where you learn something about someone that you might not have otherwise known. So let's talk about how we're going to spend our time together today. So we call this asserting your voice. Let's get clear on what we mean first by asserting your voice. Our definition for today is optimizing your contribution to conversations by speaking more powerfully from a position of strength and authenticity. And the authenticity is key. It's not about just speaking up. It's also about how you speak and that you're doing it in a way that feels true to you. Sometimes when people think of leadership or when they think of learning these skills, it feels very inauthentic. It feels like there's one way to do it, and this is going to be a how-to. This is not a how-to because it's going to look different for everyone. So this is inherently a creative task to figure out, how does it look for you? So here's what our agenda will look like today. We're going to set the stage by talking about asserting your voice by looking at the research on more masculine and more feminine communication styles. And I'm not saying male versus female. We're not talking about it in a binary way, but generally we see differences when communication is more masculine and more feminine. And that's important to look at to determine where your communication tends to fall on the spectrum. Then we're going to look at breaking down asserting your voice into 3 factors. One is how you use your voice, where we'll look at high and low power behaviors. We'll talk about your differentiating factor, which is your strengths, and getting over what we call imposter syndrome. If any of you have heard of that before, many people, more people than not, struggle with imposter syndrome. And then finally, the third factor is your energy. So some of us are more introverted, which means it takes a bit more effort to be in public and it drains us a bit more. So speaking up in meetings, making presentations just takes a bit more energy. It has nothing to do with skill or our ability to be good at it, but we want to be able to work with the energy we have, again, to remain authentic. So I want to reiterate before we get started that there is no one way to assert your voice. You get to design it based on your strengths, your preferences, and your goals, and it's going to look different for everyone. So I'm also going to ask you that you make yourself fully present for the next 50 minutes. I attend a lot of free webinars, and I often put the webinar on and then start doing something else in the background. And what I will say is this will be a better experience. You will take more away if you can be fully present. So if you plan on being fully present, I'm going to ask you to remove one distraction right now. So that might be turning over your phone. It might be turning off your email or Slack so you're not seeing other messages come through. But if you want to give yourself the most out of this session, let's go ahead and remove one distraction now. Okay. I think it's safe to assume that if you're here, you're interested in asserting your voice more effectively. So I want to get a baseline, and I'm going to ask in the chat, what are your challenges when it comes to asserting your voice? So what makes this hard at times? So no right or wrong answers, but I just want to get a feel for the room. What makes this challenging? Lack of confidence, probably the #1 thing I hear. Conflict makes me nervous. Confidence, trying to avoid conflict. Anxiety, yep. Confidence and anxiety, yes. Knowing when to speak, finding that time to jump in, yes. Imposter syndrome, yep, gonna talk about that. Not being able to articulate my thoughts, yeah. Knowing when and how to interrupt and insert my voice, yeah. Keeping up with others' energy, yeah. Lack of confidence in taking leadership, getting overwhelmed. Anxiety, yes. Imposter syndrome, having a quiet personality. I love putting it that way, a quiet personality, because personality is something we're just born with. It's not something we have to overcome because nothing's wrong with it. In fact, there are so many advantages to having a more quiet personality because someone needs to be listening. And that's a very important leadership characteristic, is being a good listener. Previous experience of not being listened to. Yeah, our history impacts us quite a bit here. Growing up with very loud people. Yes. Lack of confidence in what I have to say. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Yeah. Being quieter, so often spoken over or interrupted. Yes, yes. Okay, so lots of challenges. I see a lot of resonance with these challenges. And what I want to do is normalize these challenges. This is why we created this session, because we know it's hard. And these challenges are all very normal. The #1 challenge I hear in my work is confidence. It's why we have a section here devoted to imposter syndrome. I'm going to share some statistics on how many people feel imposter syndrome. And the #1 thing that I think is really interesting about imposter syndrome is we think we're the only one who feels it. And that's why these statistics will be interesting for you to hear of, oh, wow, I'm not the only one. It's actually more normal than not to feel a lack of confidence and to feel some imposter syndrome. So thank you for being honest with your challenges, and you're in the right place. So I hope we can do something to overcome those challenges here, but I really want to normalize them too. Okay, so let's start out by talking about strengths, because here's the thing. When we focus on our weaknesses, we become what we focus on. We become more weak. We become focused on the thing that is hard, and that makes it harder. When we focus on our strengths, we become stronger. We become focused on something that we know we can do. And when we focus on what we know we can do, confidence is a byproduct. So we don't have to focus on being more confident or having less anxiety. But when we're thinking like, I'm not confident here, I'm not confident here, that does nothing to help us. Or when we're focused on, I don't belong here, I don't belong here, I don't belong here, then we just keep feeling more of the same. So we want to, the first tip is when we focus on our strengths, we feel stronger. So let's look at just the research, what science has to say about natural strength. So you'll determine, do you identify with these or not? And we'll let you determine that. But here's what the research has to say about natural strengths that are of more feminine communication styles or more masculine communication styles. So these are generalities, and there will definitely be exceptions. And we're asking you to determine which of these do you associate with from either bucket. Okay, so I find that people are pretty good at guessing these. So I'd like to kind of crowdsource it in the chat. So what would you imagine are more feminine communication strengths that we see in the research? When you think of more feminine communication strengths, what might that look like? Active listening, being polite. Yeah, lots of listening, empathy, persuasion, understanding. Yeah, really good. So we have kind of a natural sense for this. Easy body language, kindness, politeness, waiting your turn. Yes. And you see that most of these, keep in mind, any strength overused is a weakness, right? So some of these things that are strengths might also be weaknesses at times when it comes to asserting our voice. Okay, Chloe says emotional intelligence, empathy, politeness, open facial expressions. Okay, so here's what the research has to say. And this is in your handout. There's space to write this down. I don't like to give you all the answers, right? So the top communication strengths that are more feminine tend to be an ability to read body language and pick up nonverbal cues, right? So if you've ever walked into a room and someone has asked you, are you okay? And you think, gosh, I haven't even said anything. How do you know? How do you know I'm not okay? That's that ability to read body language. Good listening skills. So you absolutely nailed that. Effective display of empathy. Many people also guess that. So these are feminine. This does not mean that these are yours. So you think about, do you associate with any of these? I'm a good listener. And it took me decades into my life to recognize that as a strength. I always just thought it meant I was quiet and I had a hard time jumping in, but it turns out that that is what being a good listener looks like. And that is a strength. Okay. So let's look at the other side. What would you imagine are the strengths of a more masculine communication style? What strengths might we observe there? So when communication is more masculine, okay, assertive, confident, speaking with confidence. Yeah, so a lot of agreement here. Speaking up, entitlement. What else might you expect to see here? Getting to the point, interesting. Problem solving. Ability to direct a conversation, taking space. I like that language. We'll talk about taking space. Directness, asserting oneself, direct words and actions, leadership. And isn't it interesting that we associate leadership with being more masculine, right? That's kind of a mental construct when we believe leadership is entirely designed, and it can look feminine or masculine. But it's interesting that sometimes our minds go to leadership inherently being more masculine, which does not have to be the case. Okay, so here's what the research says. So we do see having a more commanding physical presence, which does mean taking up space, broader gestures. For anyone who's seen a wonderful TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, she talks about power posing, and power posing is having your hands on your hips or standing with your arms in the air for 2 minutes actually does make you more confident. So that is generally a more masculine communication strength, is that taking up space, having a more commanding physical presence, generally looking non-verbally, looking more powerful. Also, you hypothesize being direct and to the point in interactions and an effective display of power. So I just want to pause for a moment and take a look at these two lists. They're quite different, right? So in your handout, I want you to add a star next to the communication strength that you relate to, regardless of which list they're on. And certainly you have others. But which of these are kind of the research would say these are the most common strengths. And here's what my message is not. Okay, so I don't want any confusion here. The message is not to shift your focus to being more masculine in order to assert your voice. That is not the message here. The message is to widen your range and to do both. Successful people, regardless of gender identification, are going to hit the marks on both lists. And that's what we want for you. So today, we're going to talk about the factors that determine how you assert your voice authentically, knowing that there's not one way that's going to work for everyone. The trick is to find what works for you. And to be honest, that's probably going to be a bit of a stretch outside your comfort zone. So if you look at anything on this list and think, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, that's okay. If you do what you've always done, you'll likely get what you've always gotten. So we want to pick where we can stretch outside our comfort zone and still be authentic, not stretch outside our comfort zone and be something different that's not authentic. So that's the sweet spot we want to find. So here are the factors that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how to use your voice to make it more powerful. We're going to talk about your differentiating factor, which are your strengths. These are the general strengths. We want to get into what are yours specifically, and then we're going to get into the energy. So let's talk about each one. So when we talk about using your voice more powerfully, we don't mean just going to the masculine strengths. We want to talk about linguistic style. And linguistic style refers to our normal pattern of speaking. It includes features like directness or indirectness, pacing, pausing, word choice, and use of elements like jokes or metaphors or stories or questions, or one of my favorite to talk about is apologies. Oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You know, we often just sprinkle in apologies into our language, and that can really diminish our power. So in other words, linguistic style refers to a set of signals that we have learned, that we've picked up along the way, that not only communicate what we mean, but they influence how others interpret what we're saying and how we evaluate one another. So it's something, it's not always, we've heard that phrase before, it's not always what you say, but it's how you say it. So how we speak matters. And we don't necessarily have to speak more if we can speak more powerfully. So there's a book called Impro by Keith Johnstone. And in that, he describes powers used by actors to portray people of high power and low power. So these are people who are acting, right? They're just playing a part, but there are a certain set of behaviors that we can do to convey high power and low power. And because of societal norms and expectations, displaying these behaviors make it more likely that we are perceived as high power or low power, regardless of our actual status. So these behaviors are not good or bad. Depending on your goal, there might be a time and a place for each. So these are just kind of interesting to look at. So again, we want to keep an eye toward authenticity. So the task is not do all the high power behaviors. It's to look at, of the behaviors that you know you engage in, what might be diminishing your power here. Okay, so we're going to look at, let's start with the lower power behaviors. Let's go ahead and crowdsource. What do you think are some of the lower power behaviors? What are some things we might do that diminish? Filler words, stuttering, being overly apologetic. Yes. Apologetic can signal insecurity. Yeah, passive voice or language, being too nice, mumbling, quiet. Yes, when we're not articulate, uncertainty, you're saying, I don't know. Yeah, all of these. For sure. Self-deprecating, that can be filler words. Yes. Okay, great. So let's look at what they articulate in this. Repeating yourself can be that there's a way to do that powerfully too. So here's what we see according to Keith Johnstone. Filling silences. I love this one because when we are not feeling confident, we kind of panic when there's quiet, right? So when we talk too much, does anyone associate with when I get nervous, I just talk too much and I just kind of, and there's no silence and I ask a question, but then I get nervous and don't allow people to answer it because I'm scared of the silence. So filling silences is a low power behavior. When we act more powerfully, we can actually use silence to our advantage. We can say something and punctuate it with silence. And it can be a little uncomfortable, but it lets it kind of hang in the air. So filling silences is a low power behavior. Talking too much. We've just covered that. Apologizing, which you mentioned in the chat. I'm sorry, but maybe I'm the only one who didn't quite catch what we're supposed to do. Odds are you're not the only one. If we can just say, I don't understand what happens next. Other people likely agree with you, right? I call the bobblehead, which is where in showing agreement, which is an ingratiating behavior of yes, go on, we're shaking our head yes, and we look like a bobblehead, those little figurines where their head is on a spring. So keep in mind when you instantly stops nodding along, Sarah. Yes, it's ingratiating. As a facilitator, when I am in a room, I appreciate people who are nodding because I think, okay, you're with me, go on. It's an ingratiating behavior that people like. It can diminish our power. So that is something to just be aware of when you're in a meeting, when you're on a Zoom. Zoom is kind of nice because we can see ourselves. So pay attention to it. Okay. So the bobblehead is something ingratiating, good. When we're showing too much agreement, it can diminish our power. Face touching or fidgeting. So that's one that we have to watch where our hands go, right? So when we have our hands around our face, generally that is low power. Hands, more power means hands are further away, or we're not using them. Of course, I love watching speakers on a stage when they don't have a podium. I am so interested by what people do with their hands, because when we keep them just glued to our sides, we look like a statue. When people comfortably use them, but keep them low, that tends to be powerful. When you look at people in power giving speeches, often they will use their hands to make a point, but generally we want to keep them away from our face or away from moving them too quickly, which looks fidgety. Okay. And then finally, using qualifiers, which many of you mentioned. So using the word just, I just wanted to check, or following, does that make sense, can diminish our power. Or I could be wrong, but diminishes our power. Okay. So you named a lot of these. Now let's talk about these are also, there's room for you to note this in your handout as well. So you might think about, what are some of the lower power behaviors that you engage in? We all engage in some of them. Mine is qualifiers, because I have an aversion to being too assertive or too prescriptive. So I'll often say, I don't know, but when in fact, I do know. I know very well. I know I've spent a lot of time thinking about a topic. So mine is qualifiers. So what's yours? Go ahead. You can chat it out if you'd like, but go ahead and note it in your handout. What is the lower power behavior that you might just want to monitor, just catch yourself doing, and maybe even replace it? I literally do them all. Yes. And that's okay. That's okay. Better to know. Awareness is one of the only things in life that we can get better at just by thinking about it. And this is awareness. So you will now catch yourself doing it. And our challenge is to find something to interrupt the behavior with. So what can you replace some of these lower power behaviors with? Yeah, we've got a lot of bobbleheads here. Yeah. Face touching and fidgeting. Good. Okay. So this is the awareness. Silence. Silence is a big one where people get a little bit uncomfortable with silence. So that's something that you can even play with later today, at dinner, tomorrow, when you're in a meeting, letting there be silence and seeing what happens. Sometimes that's when the best things happen. Excessive talking. Yeah. Okay. So let's switch to our higher power behaviors. What are some of the behaviors that you would imagine land on the list of behaviors that signal higher status, higher power? So when you think of people playing the role, acting the part of power, good posture. Yeah, body language is important. Allowing silence, eye contact, Marta, yes. Looking people in the eye, assertive, measured, slower. Yeah, so some ideas around being assertive here. Knowing when humor is appropriate. We're still working on it. Yeah, me too. Patience. Yeah. Okay, great. First of all, I love how active this chat is. This is wonderful. Reading the tone in the room. Yeah, letting your voice be heard if someone talks over you. Direct and to the point. Not letting people interrupt you. Okay. We'll talk about the concept of interruption. That can be a tricky one. Okay. Remaining comfortably still. And that's always tricky, because what is comfortably still? So I mentioned when people are standing in front of a crowd without a podium. So it is not you look like a totem pole where you are just, you're a rod standing up there. It is, I am comfortable enough to not be fidgety. Okay. So I always pay attention to also when people are sitting, is their foot bobbing? Is there something nervous where, the foot kind of gets going like this? So just noticing what are my ticks, right? Am I still, and am I comfortable with it? And what would it take to increase my comfort being still? Speaking concisely, right? So fewer words are actually more powerful. I'm sure you can think of people in a meeting that start talking, and then they talk and people are thinking, where are you going with this? And then they kind of talk their way into something, but we had to go on this huge journey with them to get to their point. That's a low power move. And sometimes we think of that as someone asserting their voice, but it's doing it in a low power way. So fewer words can be even more powerful. Eliminating apologies or qualifiers. So as you mentioned in the chat, so that means just saying it, eliminating just, even eliminating I think, which is something that's a very subtle qualifier. I think it would be interesting, or I think we could try, if you think that, others might think it too. Your thought is a fact. So taking away I think and just putting it out there. We might want to consider. Okay. And of course, allowing silence, which some of you mentioned. Okay. So go ahead in your chat, or excuse me, in your handout, and note some of the behaviors that you naturally engage in, and choose a behavior, choose one high power behavior to adopt and one low power behavior to work on dropping. It's interesting, the conversation about autism in the chat. That's really interesting how being on the spectrum and neurodiversity can influence some of these things. Thanks for bringing that into the room. And I love that, being authentically autistic. I think that's a great goal. Okay, so note one higher power behavior that you want to try on. And again, there's that thin line between being maybe outside your comfort zone, but still finding a way to do it authentically. So that might be remaining still. That might be speaking more concisely, using fewer words, or it might be just stopping doing something like qualifiers or apologies. Yeah, I absolutely want to eliminate qualifiers and apologies. One way to do that is to take away the I thinks, to take away the just. And of course, you've probably heard that you can replace any apology with a thank you. So instead of I'm sorry I'm late, it's thank you for waiting. Instead of I'm sorry I wasn't able to do this, thank you for showing me grace. Thank you for your patience. Great. Okay. So we have our first strategy is adding a high power behavior. And here's the thing, we don't need to do everything at once. That's when things become overwhelming, is when we try to do too much at once. So the idea is not do all these things. That's too much. That's when we start to feel like we're getting into inauthentic territory. We want to increase our power by 10%. That means doing one thing, or even just not doing something that's lower power. So that's the goal. It's not eliminate all these and do all these, it's choose one. And once you get some habit built, everything happens by habit, then maybe you want to try another one. But just start with one. When we try to start with everything, which is a tendency that we try to do, we often get overwhelmed and then go back to not doing anything. So that's our first strategy, is how we speak and adding some power. Okay, now let's go to our second strategy, which is your strengths. This is your differentiating factor. It's what makes you uniquely you. It's your brand of genius, and it's your strengths. So let's talk for just a minute about confidence. Feeling confident, which is something that many of you mentioned at the beginning, is a struggle to asserting your voice. And competence, right, which is feeling like we know what we're doing. So let's get some, I'm big in having definitions. So let's define each of them. Here's the definition of competence. When we feel competent, we believe, I know enough to speak on this topic. Okay, so we saw that challenge. There was a competence challenge of I should be the one speaking. I am an expert. I know what I'm saying. I believe in what I'm saying. If you don't feel competent enough, the answer is pretty easy. We do our homework, right? We prepare. Preparation is the antidote to not feeling fully competent. We rehearse. We study up. We become more competent. So here's the thing, if you do feel competent, if you think, actually, I am the person in this room who probably knows the most about it, then the challenge is owning it, because sometimes you really do know more. And that can be a source of strength and of pride of like, you know what, I've spent more time thinking about this topic than anyone else. That can be your differentiating factor. Sometimes it's just owning it. Of, you know what, I've prepared, I've spent hours, I've spent my life thinking about this. I just need to own it. That can cause you to feel more confident. So competence is about homework, it's about knowing, it's about practicing and preparation. Confidence, on the other hand, is when we think, I believe I'm the one who should be speaking. It's a deservingness, okay? If you don't believe you're the one who should be speaking, then you need to ask yourself, why not me, right? So this is where imposter syndrome comes in, when we believe we don't deserve our achievements. And this is very common. So imposters feel like we don't belong, right? Like somehow we snuck in, we slipped through some sort of gate that would have otherwise kept us out. The hiring process, the admissions process, whatever it is, it feels like it's a mistake that I'm here. Everyone else deserves to be here and got here on their own merit, but I somehow snuck in. I used to coach someone who said she felt like there would be a SWAT team that came in and kind of the jig would be up someday and she would be outed for not really deserving to be there. And that is so, so common. So when we are feeling like an imposter, like we don't belong, we need to acknowledge our expertise. We need to acknowledge our accomplishments and we need to acknowledge our strengths. These are the things that actually earned us the position that we're in. And that's no mistake. So you might want to think about which one of these, competence or confidence, is more important to you. Which one would you like to have more of? Appearing competent, like you know your stuff, or appearing confident, which means speaking with more authority, even if you might need to fact check what you're saying later. So which one is more important to you? Competence. Equally for me. I would value competence for myself. Yeah, interesting. Competence. Yeah, lots of competence. Yeah. Competence. Sarah with an exclamation point. Great. So in my experience, this is exactly what I see. Yeah, just over, we should have done this as a poll. But competence, but it depends on the situation. Oh, interesting, Alana, confidence, because I feel somewhat competent already. Chef's kiss to that one. That's great. So here's what I see in my experience. I see a lot of people, just like we see here, who are focusing on being competent, right? Let me do my homework. Let me stay up late at night. Let me work really hard to be more competent. Let me prepare to be more competent, while we're being surpassed by people who might be focused on confidence, who will come in and speak authoritatively, but maybe not fully know what they're speaking about while we're sitting doing our homework. So the goal is not an either or of, okay, then you need to shift on being more confident. Again, it's do both. We want to help you feel confident and competent. So you might want to think of a meeting where you want to make more of a contribution. So let's, a meeting or a situation, I'm saying meeting, but it could be any situation. So let's focus on how to do both, which many of you mentioned. So let's move into that by talking a little bit about imposter syndrome, because for many people, if we want to feel more confident, we have to get over the imposter syndrome. So let's talk about this. I hear about this a lot in my line of work as a coach working with people one-on-one. This is often something that we don't share very often because we feel kind of alone in feeling it. Sometimes I refer to this as the who am I's. So who am I to pitch this idea? Who am I to apply for this position? It's anything you can replace who am I to do this. That's often, and I hear this from people in very high power, in very big positions where they've achieved amazing things. And you think, oh, how could they possibly feel that way? But sometimes once you've gotten the Metacritic score, or you've won video game of the year, then you have a pressure to do it again. And then it's oh, I kind of got that one by mistake. Now I need to have this pressure to do it again. So you'd be surprised how many people feel this. Research from the Center for Creative Leadership suggests that as many as 2 in every 3 people struggle with imposter syndrome. So if you think you're the only one, you are not. If there are going to be 3 of you in a breakout room, 2 of you likely feel this way. It's pretty rampant in the games industry. Yes, it is. And if you haven't heard of it until today, well, welcome. This is something that that we will completely break down if you're still thinking, wait, what is it? So in addition to making you feel bad, it's very simply feeling like you don't belong, right? In addition to making you feel bad, imposter syndrome can limit you in other ways, okay? It can lead to burnout. It can lead to emotional exhaustion. It can lead to lack of motivation. It causes greater stress and anxiety. Okay, so those are 5 ways that this is limiting us if we're currently feeling it. Well, anybody can fall victim. So it doesn't mean like you're wrong, you shouldn't feel this way. That's not what we're saying. Anyone can fall victim to it. Research shows that it is even more common in underrepresented populations. Okay, so if you are in an underrepresented population, we're even more likely to feel it. So here are 3 things that we can do to minimize it, because the problem isn't feeling it. The challenge becomes, how do we move through it? We can't control if we feel it. We can control how we minimize it and move through it. So this is going to be on your handout. The first thing we need to do is focus on our achievements. So this is often when we are feeling imposter syndrome, we are feeling that we have been lucky or that we somehow slipped through a process. When we focus on our achievements, the things that we have done and have accomplished, that helps us see like, no, I have done some things. I am not just here by luck or by chance. So go ahead and jot down, if you think of where you might be feeling some imposter syndrome, where you might be feeling like, I'm not totally sure I deserve this, or I'm not totally sure I belong here. Go ahead and just jot down 3 achievements that you can say, I have done this. Nobody can take this away from me. And maybe even starting to tap into some pride. And achievements can even just be, maybe it's not like an award. Maybe it's just, I've worked really, really hard. That's an achievement. When we focus on our achievements, we allow ourselves to feel proud. And it consciously, we consciously avoid crediting things to luck. So go ahead and jot those down. Next, we want to challenge your limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs are these things that we believe to be true. And we're treating them as if they're true when they might not actually be true. Okay, they're assumptions. Common limiting beliefs tend to have to do with anything around enoughness. Okay, being smart enough, being talented enough, being fast enough. You know, we talk about the quality bar, you know, doing enough work or having enough talent or trying hard enough to hit a quality bar. Those are all limiting beliefs. So that enoughness, and for some of us, it goes into other, you know, other factors of life, being a good enough partner, a good enough child to our parents, a good enough parent to our children. This is just kind of insidious into this belief of the not enoughness. It can take physical form. Am I thin enough? Am I good looking enough? So just notice, is enoughness, that is one of the most insidious forms of limiting belief. Is that something for you? Other things that you can believe to be true could be, you know, your intelligence level, your talent, your inherent talent. Those are all versions of the enoughness belief of somehow I don't have enough of this. And here's the thing, that isn't true. That is a story that's on a reel in your head, and that's called a limiting belief. So our key here is to ask ourselves, what evidence do I have that this is true? And then more importantly, what evidence do I have that this is not true? there are differences in limiting beliefs according to usually how we were raised, and the culture that we were raised in, including the culture of our family, has a lot to say about our limiting beliefs. So yes, they're things that we've picked up along the way. We are not born with limiting beliefs. We adopt them as we move through the world. Maybe you were bullied. Maybe a teacher or someone, an adult when you were younger, told you something that you believed was true. And then you just lived your life as if it was. So the powerful question here is it true? What evidence do I have that it might not be? And then it's truly just a cap that we're putting on ourselves. When we can release it, just start acting as if it's not true, our confidence goes up naturally. The answer is simple. It doesn't mean it's easy to implement, but the answer is simple. We could just not believe it. It's a story we're telling ourselves. And then the third aspect is actually writing down our strengths. So what is generally true is that we are keenly aware of every mistake we've ever made, right? And we're not paying attention to our strengths. We're saying, oh, anybody could do that. It was no big deal. Anybody could do it. So we're actually discounting the things that we're good at because they come easily. And that is the very definition of a strength. It comes easily to you when it doesn't necessarily to everyone else. So as crazy as it seems to just focus on our strength, we're doing something equally as crazy by obsessing over our weaknesses. We are obsessed with our weaknesses. Oh, I did that wrong. I could have done that better. When we can catch ourselves in our strength, like, there's me being a good listener, then we're shifting our focus. It's just where our brain is focused. And when we can focus on our strengths, we just happen to feel more confident. We don't have to focus on the confidence, because the confidence can tap into our limiting beliefs of not enoughness, of like, confidence is yet another thing I don't have enough of. Okay, when we can focus on our strengths, and that might even be, quieter things like listening, like connecting one-on-one, like being a really good artist, like being a really good programmer, we can build our confidence. We can build our belongingness, because I deserve to be here because of these strengths. These strengths are good and other people appreciate them. And other people cannot appreciate our strengths until we appreciate them ourselves, because it's not until we appreciate them that we can really show them. Otherwise, even our strengths might be showing up as weaknesses. Okay, so those are our three things. I want to make sure that you have a few things jotted down. And here's the thing. Is there anybody, let's just do a quick, either a +1 in the chat or a show of hands. Is there anybody that is having a hard time thinking of their strengths? Like, wait, what am I good at? Yeah. Me too. Victoria, yes. Alana, yes. Helen's hand is raised. Yeah, totally. Sophia, that is so common. I see this all the time of like, wait, I don't know what I'm good at. And that is just another symptom of being so obsessed with where things are not enough or could be better that we've entirely lost sight of our superpowers. Getting in touch with your superpower is perhaps the most important thing you can do to feel more confident, to reduce imposter syndrome, and to assert your voice. So if you don't know, if you just can't think what it is, here are two things you can do. Number one, ask people. And you can send an email. Here's very simple. Send an email to 5 people. These can be people you work with, people you know, friends, your partner, your parents, your siblings. You blame it on this. Hey, I attended something and they made us send an email asking what our strengths are. What strengths do you see in me? People will tell you, because here's the thing. People see your strengths, even if you do not. And it's just interesting to see what comes back to you. So send an email to 5 people. Hey, I'm doing this exercise. We need to figure out what our strengths are. What would you say my strengths are? And usually what is true is people will say the same thing. You'll see some convergence in what people say. So that's kind of the organic way to do it. Ask people, they will tell you. don't ask them your weaknesses, by the way. This is not a need to balance. You know your weaknesses, and what we need to do the digging on, or what are our strengths. And the second thing is, there's a book called Strengths Finder. If you buy it, it comes with an assessment. It is by the Gallup organization, which did the largest longitudinal research on human strengths, to ask the question, how many human strengths are there? Turns out there are 34 human strengths. And when you buy the book, it comes with an assessment that gives you your top 5 strengths. So it's if you're more data driven, if you're more analytical, that might be your preferred method. Strengths are not something that will always remain the same. There are 34, they will change in the order. So usually we have the same strengths over the course of our lifetime, but depending on what we're doing, the environment we're in, different things might be magnified. Oh, I love what Sarah is suggesting. Once you and your friends got together and talked about 3 things you admire or think are your strengths, that kind of supported you. The name of the book, again, and Jamie will put this in the chat, is called Strengths Finder. It's Strengths Finder 2.0. I think the author's name is Tom Rath. Is that right? I use it all the time. Okay, so 2 ways that you can tap into your strengths, which is very important in order to get some traction here. Okay, so the last, and there will be time for a little bit of QA at the end. The last thing we're going to do is talk about your energy. So we toss around the term introversion and extroversion a lot. And sometimes we think of introversion as being people who are just less social. While that might be true, and we think of extroversion as people who are comfortable at a party taking the microphone or giving a speech. And while both of those might be true, it's really about energy and where we get our energy. When we are extroverted, we get our energy from other people. So I like to think about it as what you do at the end of a really busy day. So if you've been at a conference or if you've been around people all day, at the end of it, what do you want to do? If you're an extrovert, you're saying like, oh, I am like fired up being around all those people. Let's like go to the pub now. Let's go out for drinks and dinner and keep this party going. That would be an extroverted response. A more introverted response is now I need to, now I need to go, James. I need to go home and go to bed. I need to go be alone. I need to go take a bath and be quiet, and I need to go plug in. That's how I think about it. I think of like a cell phone. When we're introverted, we need to go plug in by ourselves. When we're introverted, we keep the best part of ourselves for ourselves and for the small number of people that know us really well. So what that means is acknowledging where we get our energy and how to conserve it for other people. So in a meeting, which I think often we have a harder time asserting our voices in meetings, in a meeting where lots of people are talking, the extroverts in the crowd are getting like excited by this. This is a cool, energetic exchange. And now people are like piling in. That's when it can get really hard to speak up, because the extroverts are like, yeah, this energy is amazing. And they're talking over each other and they're interrupting each other. And it's just, and everybody's getting energized by it. If we're extroverted. If we're introverted by it, that it might be like, this is too much and like too many people are talking and I don't know how to get my voice in this meeting. So that is just important to notice. That is probably not the situation where your voice is best heard if you're introverted. Even if you're extroverted, sometimes it can be hard to figure out how to jump in, but you probably are getting more ideas. Whereas if you're more introverted, you're probably thinking, I need it to be quiet so I can think. I need time to think. That's a hallmark of being more introverted. So when it's time to jump in, here are the things that the suggestion for introverts, which that's often a situation where it's harder for introverts to jump in, is that the goal is not just to say something. A factor to consider is, what are the topics that you should speak on? And that might be either because you are an expert. This is a topic I know a lot about. So when it comes up, I should speak on it because I care a lot about it. I know a lot about it. So it's not just this global pressure to speak up more. It's, I think of it as a carousel going around. It's kind of like picking the horse you want. And then when that horse comes around, that's when you speak up. So that might be something that instead of having global pressure to assert your voice more, particularly if you're more introverted, pick your topics, either because you care about them a lot, they're of value to you, you're an expert, or maybe because it's your superpower. One of my superpowers is asking questions. So when I feel a question coming up, I'd say, okay, that's the horse on the carousel. So now I might try a little bit harder to insert myself in the conversation. Here's the other thing, is to think ahead of time. So often it's the in the moment thinking that's tough. So I often prepare my questions going into a meeting of what do I really want to know? Or what do I think the group might be struggling? Because one of my more feminine communication preferences is reading the room. So often my contribution to a meeting is not one of, like asserting my intelligence. It's one of paying attention to the group of, hey, I think, the energy in the group might be waning a little bit. What do we need here? And often people appreciate that as the contribution. So taking the pressure off yourself sometimes to make an intellectual contribution and recognizing that questions, that observations, that requests might also be of value to the group, and picking your place and thinking about what contribution might look like ahead of time. And sometimes in some meetings, giving yourself, or in some situations, giving yourself an out that maybe it's not as important. Okay. Also keep in mind that speaking during meetings is not the only way to assert your voice. Other ways to make your presence known might be in the chat, in an email afterwards, saying, you know what, I had time to think about this and I have some thoughts on this topic. That can be very, very useful. Dylan is saying having at least a few questions after listening for a few minutes is a great way to join the conversation. Totally. So here's what I hope you take away from this. Given the variance in these factors, right? Both how we get our energy, our relationship to imposter syndrome, which is exclusively about you, and our higher and lower status behaviors that we tend to engage in. There's no single way to assert your voice. It's going to look different for everyone, and we need to design it. We gave you 3 things to think about for designing it: higher and lower power behaviors, where your energy comes from, and then thinking about your unique strengths code. So what we're going to do now is we are going to send you into a breakout group where you can talk about this a little bit more. So we're going to give you about 12 minutes for you to share what's your number 1 challenge. And then considering the factors we just talked about, whether it be the high and low behaviors, your strengths, anything with imposter syndrome, or your energy, what are you going to try? And for the other 2 members that are listening to this, here's your opportunity to be good listeners and to support and say, you could consider this, or what about this? So this is an opportunity to do a little bit of peer coaching. So you each only have about 3 minutes to introduce yourself and share these things that you're thinking about, and then just really support each other. Okay. So we're going to send you, like I said, each person will have 3 minutes to do this, and this will just allow you to think about this in a more applied setting. Our goal here is that you come away with action that you can take. And the more you can talk about it right now, the more likely you'll be willing to take action, and to also be inspired by action other people are taking. Okay.
I have one question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please.
So at the beginning, you said something about apologies being an interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering whether you could elaborate on that a little bit.
So apologies are something, it falls into the category of what we call ingratiating behaviors. So ingratiating behaviors are things that we do to make other people more comfortable. As someone who does a lot of ingratiating behaviors, often our ingratiating behaviors come at a cost to us, that sometimes we're choosing other people's comfort over our own, or over our own power. So when we're apologizing, like when somebody says, oh, I couldn't get into the meeting room, it could be their own technical difficulty, and we're saying, oh, I'm so sorry, when in reality that might not be ours to apologize for, but we're basically doing it to be nice. So that's where that replacement behavior of thanking people, oh, well, thank you so much for trying, or thank you so much for letting me know, allows us to be nice, to do the ingratiating while still keeping our power up and not diminishing our own power. So that's something to watch of ingratiating behaviors. That's a wonderful thing. That is a strong suit, and any strength overused can turn into a weakness. So we want to make sure that our ingratiating behaviors to be nice to other people, to help them feel welcome, are not coming at the expense of our own power. Someone also asked a question about books. I do have a lot of recommendations. The Confidence Code is a great book about confidence and how to build confidence. I mentioned Strengths Finder. There is a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. Jamie, if you could drop that TED Talk in the chat, that's an easy one to watch. If you have not read the book Quiet by Susan Cain, and you are on the more introverted side, that book will change your life. It's about being introverted in a world that can't stop talking. And it really kind of gives, sometimes we think of introversion as a weakness, particularly as it relates to asserting one's voice. And it really shifts the perspective on the value of introversion. Okay. Rachel, I'm looking at your question in the chat. I remember studies that women were more likely to be disliked for assertive behavior. Female bosses were more likely to be criticized for speaking the same way as male bosses. Yes, a lot of that comes with linguistic style. We do tend to see research that suggests that when women show more assertive behaviors, it is more likely to be interpreted as aggressive than powerful. That tends to be just a gender role stereotype that we see. So one way to combat that, if you are more on the assertive side, is to make sure that you're asserting power in ways that serve you well, because of course that is a bias. That's a gender bias that we have. However, we're not in control of other people. So we know that if we are demonstrating more assertive behavior, particularly as a gender identifying as a woman, we're more likely to be considered by others. That gender bias is likely to kick in. So you might, if you are naturally more assertive as a woman and you've received that feedback, you might want to look at what are some of the other higher power behaviors that I could adopt that won't trigger the bias quite as much. I give feedback to people all the time, and I've often had to give the feedback that someone seems aggressive, and I often point out, you recognize that's your own gender role bias, correct? Okay, I recognize that we do still have a few questions. Laura, you have your hand up, so I want to make sure I grab that question, and then we will wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the talking less part, and it's less about like filling the silences and more about belaboring a point when like I'm not sure about what I'm saying, I'm not sure if the other person is getting what I'm saying, and I think that makes me look weaker. Do you have any advice on that?
My advice on that is to try to articulate our points in as few words as possible, and then ask a question. Often my favorite question for that is, what's your reaction to that? And then I can get a sense of, I'm following along, makes sense, or I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I recognize, okay, now I need to do a bit more explanation. So trying to chunk out, I think of it sometimes as putting it in bullet points, what it is we want to say, trying to say our bullet points, and then check in with our audience to say, what's your reaction to that? And then often if they're tracking, they'll say I'm tracking, and then you can keep going. Or if you need more words, then they'll ask a question to give you a sense of where we need to include more words. There's I forget what book it's from, but the term is be brief, be brilliant, be gone. That's how to be remembered, is to say it really, really briefly, but really brilliantly, and then be done. And that's what we remember. Okay. If you do have other questions, there will be the, or if we didn't get to your question, Jenny will be sending out this presentation also with a short survey for you to complete, just to give us some data on how this went over for you. If you have other questions that you would like answered, you can send them, and I'm happy to send a response, or we could crowdsource responses for Slack so you can see them. I will ask you to do one last crowdsourcing to get a sense of what are you taking out of today? What are 1 to 2 things that you will do differently as a result of today? So go ahead and drop that in the chat. We ask you to crowdsource that because what you are doing could be inspiration for someone else. So go ahead and let us know what you're doing. Hands off my face. That's great. Mike, thank you. Because it could give someone else an idea of, oh, that's good. I want to do that too. So we do this kind of for the benefit of other people. Also, I saw the question in the chat, is the survey anonymous? Yes, it won't ask you your name. It's a generic link. We just use that to continually update and improve our sessions, and we'll also provide it back to Limit Break so they understand what was useful and anything that could be useful for others. Project my voice, work to eliminate apologies and qualifiers. Great. Being more mindful with word economy. Oh, I like that way of putting it. Work on qualifiers. No more I thinks. Yeah. Take out just. Excellent. Eliminate filler words. Yeah, great. Practice speaking concisely. Great. Apologizing less. Using qualifiers, but also want to stop treating my own quietness and introvertedness as a negative. Yes, you need to read quiet if you haven't yet. Being more direct. Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for welcoming me to your group. Had so much fun with you all today, and I'm really excited to hear stories of how you're using this out in the world. I hope you found it really practical. Thank you so much. Look for the survey and today's presentation coming out later today or tomorrow. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.